Okay, continuing here in week 2 of American National Government, we're on the PowerPoint slide number 50, talking about the Bill of Rights, okay? Obviously the Anti-Federalists wanted a Bill of Rights, but the Federalists, again, framers like James Madison and Alexander Hamilton, opted to not include one for a very good reason, okay? One of the reasons was the doctrine of express powers, okay? The idea that government cannot lawfully engage in actions such as the suppression of speech that were not authorized by the Constitution. So the Constitution doesn't say the government can suppress speech. It can't. The Constitution doesn't say the government can suppress freedom of conscience. It can't, okay? Things like that, as the framers created it, they thought that would suffice, okay? Delegates also argued that a Bill of Rights is undesirable because the government might feel free to disregard any right inadvertently left off the list. In other words, okay, you got, let's see, free speech, freedom of religion, freedom to petition government, gun rights. Okay, you didn't talk about cruel and unusual punishment. I guess we can engage in cruel and unusual punishment. Okay? In other words, don't give the government any ideas. Once you list a Bill of Rights, government will go, okay, they didn't list this one, we can do this. In other words, anything not listed, we can do. Okay, so they said, don't do that. The Bill of Rights also traditionally had been created by monarchical governments for subjects. Okay, I, the king, being magnanimous, I grant you freedom of speech, okay, because you're my subjects. And to the framers, they're like, wait a minute, hold on. The American citizen is not a subject. They're citizens, right? And again, they are higher than subjects, and so that we're not going to stoop to that. That is not. In other words, the government doesn't grant us rights. We already have pre-political, inalienable rights given to us by our Creator, and government doesn't give them to us. Okay. Another argument that Alexander Hamilton made in Federalist 84 was this: is that the Constitution is itself, in every rational sense and to every useful purpose, a Bill of Rights. Okay, so he said, listen, it kind of already is one. You've got habeas corpus embedded in it. You've got no ex post facto law embedded in it, and all kinds of other rights embedded in it, and you don't need it. Okay, that was the argument. Okay. But of course, the Anti-Federalists' argument prevailed. Give us a Bill of Rights and we're not going to ratify the Constitution. They read the Constitution, they see how powerful the federal government is, and they're like, give us a Bill of Rights or we're not going to do it, okay? And so, the Constitution, unlike the Bill of Rights, gave the federal government direct power over individuals, okay, over the individual citizen. It could compel you to to pay taxes, and you had to, okay? Good luck defying the IRS. Okay, in the Articles it was optional, but under the Constitution it was mandatory. So the Bill of Rights became a buffer. Okay, you've got the citizen down here, you got the federal government up here. The Bill of Rights is this buffer. Okay, in other words, the government has to deal with this Bill of Rights before it can get down to you to take away your life, liberty, and property. Okay, so that's what it meant to do. Okay. So let's look at slide number 52. Let's talk about judicial review, okay? And you can kind of read this, but suffice to say, judicial review is not in the Constitution, okay? You could spend many fruitless hours looking for the phrase judicial review in the Constitution. It's not there, okay? The framers granted the Supreme Court the power to decide on all cases under this Constitution, but that's kind of vague. It's ambiguous. There's no specifics, okay? And so because the Constitution didn't explicitly grant the Supreme Courts the power of judicial review, it actually had to be created in practice by the court, okay? Or if you want to look at it this way, it's as if the fox is now guarding the hen house, okay? The ability of the Supreme Court to strike down judicial review or to strike down acts of Congress, okay? The Supreme Court had to create it. So it's as if the fox created the rules for guarding the hen house, okay? A little bit kind of interesting, okay? So the court case that did this, that granted this, is the court case called Marbury versus Madison in 1803, okay? And you can kind of see there on slide 53, it talks about it. Okay, basic background of the case is simply this. In 1800, John Adams, who was a Federalist, lost the election to Thomas Jefferson. But as most politicians are wont to do, he tried to fill a lot of spots on the federal court system with Federalist judges to perpetuate the power of the Federalists if they never won an election again. And the Federalists never did. They never won a national election for the presidency again. And so the idea of if you can stack the deck and if you can get Federalist judges into the courts, you know, they serve for life. So the power of the Federalists rather would last another 30 years. Okay, so Adams appoints, you know, all of these 59 lower court judgeships. Many of them get on, but by the time Jefferson is inaugurated, basically the music stops and William Marbury is without a chair, right? He doesn't have his judgeship. So he sues, okay, to become, you know, he's saying, I was granted this, I need to be given this, okay? And he was prevented it by James Madison, who was Thomas Jefferson's Secretary of State. So in the case, Chief Justice John Marshall decided that Marbury had a right to his commission, but that the Supreme Court lacked the constitutional authority to deliver the commissions. In other words, they said, we don't have that authority. He said, while Congress in 1789 passed legislation that gave the Supreme Court this power, the Constitution prohibits Congress from expanding the court's powers without an amendment. Okay, so the legislation that provided the authorization was rendered constitutionally invalid, and so basically, Chief Justice Marshall struck down an act of Congress. And oh, by the way, Chief Justice Marshall was a Federalist appointment. In other words, he was thinking, gosh, if I don't grant this guy this authority, or if I grant this guy this you know, if Marbury gets his position, I've got a Democratic Republican president and a Congress controlled not by Federalists anymore. They might try to impeach me. So you can kind of see the political dilemma he was in, a lot of political wranglings going on. But the bottom line is judicial review was created by the Supreme Court, okay? So in striking down this act of Congress on constitutional grounds, the court asserted its power of judicial review, the power of the judiciary to decide whether a government official or institution has acted within the limits of the Constitution, and if not, to declare its action null and void. Now, constitutional scholars will tell us that Chief Justice John Marshall didn't intend judicial review to be the be-all, end-all for the Supreme Court. The reason being is that this was decided in 1803. The next time the court engaged in judicial review was 1857. Okay, 54 years later in the court case Dred Scott versus Sanford, which struck down the Missouri Compromise of 1820, an act of Congress. So the logic goes like this. Sorry, a lot of M's, okay? If Chief Justice Marshall had meant judicial review to be the be-all, end-all, surely, and again, he led the court for the next 30 years, there would have been more cases within 10 to 20 years of his decision where judicial review was engaged in, but it never was, okay? So the thinking was he never meant it, and it was actually an anomaly, okay? But then after 1857, the court was like, oh, we can do this? And though suddenly they began to do it more and more and more, to where now nobody thinks twice of the fact that I don't like this act of Congress, I'm going to the courts for it, okay? But it was never originally intended by the framers, okay? Issues, okay? Thomas Jefferson, again, not one of the framers, but the writer of the Declaration of Independence, his thinking carries weight. This is what he thought of Marbury versus Madison. This is slide 54. This member of the government was at first considered as the most harmless and helpless of all its organs. But it is proven that the power of declaring what the law is, by sapping and mining slyly and without alarm the foundations of the Constitution, can do what open force could not dare to attempt. Okay, so he had big issues with Marbury versus Madison. And there's other framers that have issues as well. So to think that judicial review was originally intended by the founders is inaccurate. Okay, they had big issues with it. Okay, if you go to the next two slides, I'm going to skip over these because I already talked about democracy versus republic. I've already kind of got into that. The last thing I want to talk about here is just this idea of Jacksonian democracy. Okay, linking the people and the presidency. One of the things that we understand today is that the presidency has a lot of power. The presidency represents the people, right? Or you'll hear people say, well, he's not my president. I didn't vote for him. okay? And you'll see that from both Democrats and Republicans, conservatives and liberals. But the presidency in America is very, very popular as far as in the sense of most Americans look to the presidency as the institution of the federal government, which is not true. There's 3 co-equal branches there, okay? This came about in the 20th century through the progressive movement, which I'll talk about in the next video. But a precursor to this happened in the late 1820s, early 1830s with the presidency of President Jackson, Andrew Jackson, okay? In his election in 1828, he began to argue that, hey, you know, I'm a strong president, I'm a strong leader, I represent the people, okay? And America at this time, again, was very regional or very local. Okay, there was not this concept of USA, USA. Most people, if you asked somebody from Michigan or if you asked somebody from Illinois or Kentucky, I'm a Kentuckian, I'm an Illinoisan, I'm a Michigander. They did not have this concept of a president or a national idea of what it meant to be an American. It was much more regional and local. So Jackson began to argue that the president was the only official who could legitimately claim to represent the people as a whole. And so to connect the presidency more closely to the people, Jackson urged the states to award their electoral votes to the candidate who wins the state's popular vote. In other words, winner take all. Whatever candidate wins the state's popular votes, all the electoral votes go to him, okay? It wasn't set up originally that way. It was more kind of proportional, okay? And so he began to, again, the Electoral College today reflects that. Okay, so it places the selection of the president in the voters' hands in most elections. The candidate who gets the most popular votes nationally is likely to finish first in enough states to win a majority of electoral votes. Okay, again, the first attempt to connect the presidency to the people. It shifted after Jackson for the next 80 to 90 years. It went back to more of a regional conception, and people did not tend to look to the president like we do today, okay? Again, there are exceptions in this electoral vote conception where you had Hayes in 1876, Harrison in 1888, President Bush in 2000, and then Trump in 2016. They all won the presidency due to the Electoral College, but they lost the popular vote. Okay, I'll end there.